When you're working on an image for the web in Photoshop, you'll run into many tools and features that apply color, from painting features to the type tools to the fill command and more. There are multiple ways to select color in Photoshop. The most full-featured method is the Color Picker, which I'll cover in this movie. Let's start by going to the bottom of the toolbox and taking a look at the two boxes there that have color in them. The topmost box is the foreground color box, which you'll use most often. The box underneath that is the background color box, which comes into play less frequently, mostly when you're making a gradient or as a place to store a second color for quick access. I can switch the foreground and background colors by clicking this double-pointed arrow or by pressing the X key on my keyboard. And if I want to go back to just black and white in these boxes, I can click this little icon or press the D key on my keyboard. How do I get different colors into these color boxes? One way is to use the Color Picker. To open the Color Picker to choose the foreground color, I'll click in the foreground color box. And if I wanted to choose the background color, I would click in the background color box. In the Color Picker, I can see that I'm choosing the foreground color. To select a foreground color, I'll start with this slider, moving it to the hue that I want. So let's say I'm trying to select a red. Then I'll move over to this large color field, and here I can choose a shade of that red hue by clicking on it. I'll see the new color that I've selected here in the color square. The top half of the square shows me my new color, the bottom half of the square shows me my current foreground color. The slider and the color field are actually displaying the three properties that Photoshop uses to describe color. Hue, which is the actual color, brightness, which is lightness or darkness, and saturation, which is the amount of gray in a color. By default, hue is displayed in the slider, and brightness and saturation, which together I call the shade, are in this large color field. But I can rearrange where those properties are displayed by using these H, S, and B buttons in the color mode area of the dialog box. Right now hue is selected, and so I see hue in the slider. But if I were to click on B for brightness, then the slider would be displaying the brightness values of the selected color. And in the Color Picker, I would see different hues, as well as different levels of saturation. Back in the color mode area, let's look at the RGB color mode, which is another way of describing color. RGB values are often used to specify corporate colors. So for example, your client may ask you to design a logo for his website using a color for which he specifies the RGB values. In that case, you can just type those values into these three fields to select the color your client has in mind. For example, if I were to type 186 in the red field, 11 in the green field, and 2 in the blue field, I would end up with this particular color of red, as displayed here in the new area of the color square. Yet another way of describing colors is by their hexadecimal values. Hexadecimal is a special numbering system that's used in web code to describe color to web browsers. If I know the hexadecimal value of a color, maybe I can glean it from another part of my web code, I can then type that value in this number box down here. So let's say that I know the hexadecimal code is 3366CC. I'll type that, and that gives me the particular blue that I see here in the new area of the color square. Now let's talk about web-safe colors. Although designing with web-safe colors is no longer a requirement, as I explained in the last movie, sometimes it's just easier to design with a limited number of colors, like the 216 web-safe colors. I can limit the number of colors from which to choose in the Color Picker to just web-safe colors by clicking this Only Web Colors checkbox. And now any color that I select here in this field, or to which I move the color slider, will be a web-safe color. I'm going to uncheck the Only Web Colors box for a moment and select another color in the color field to show you what this cube means over here to the right of the color square. When I see a cube here, I know that I've selected a new color that is not web safe. And if for some reason I need this color to be web safe, I'll just click on that cube and Photoshop automatically selects the nearest web safe color for me. When I'm all done selecting the color I want to use here in the Color Picker, I'll click OK, and that sets that color as my foreground color in the foreground color box. And now I can paint or fill or otherwise use my new foreground color. The Color Picker isn't the only color selection feature in Photoshop. There are a number of others, which I'll cover in the next movies in this chapter.